from among them with a message of warning. The ugly truth lurks unseen. To stem the tide of a rising threat, the time has come to lift the veil. Welcome to Unveiling the Threat of Islamic Extremism, presented by Coombe Ministries. Welcome to Session 5, Unveiling Islamic Extremism in America. This closed-door recording session is a candid conversation between Kamal Salim and Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin. They discuss the looming danger Islamic radicals pose to America.
General Jerry, I'm so glad that you are here with me today, and as we talk about the subject matters very soon, but I want the people to know who you are and what's your background and why you're credible in all this.
Thanks, Kamal. I'm glad to be with you. I spent 36 and a half years in the United States Army, retiring in 2007. And my last 4 years, I was the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence in the George W. Bush administration. So I have seen a lot of information, a lot of intelligence about what our enemies are trying to do to America and in America. But I really came up in the Army through special operations. I've served in the Rangers, I've served in Special Forces, and I was one of the original members of the Delta Force. Now, it's important to remember that the Delta Force was created really in 1978 because of the growing trend towards Islamic extremism, which manifested in terrorism. So since 1978, I've been watching all kinds of terrorism, but particularly Islamic terrorism and Islamic extremism. So I'm not an expert, I'm not an authority, but I have watched it for a long time, and I do know a fair amount about it just because it was my job to know.
Well, thank you so much. You're also an author. You have a book. Tell us about your book and a little bit.
I have multiple books. I wrote an autobiography called Never Surrender, which is really about my time in the military and the experiences of being in combat, being in a variety of different situations, serving at the CIA and other things. So Never Surrender is really a book about faith. We call the subtitle The Crossroads of Faith and Freedom. I've written 2 novels, both of which are for general audiences, but they are about a man of faith who is drawn into the world of espionage. And it's important to understand that the characters in my book are real characters, even though I write it as a novel. And the situations that I portray in my novels, the first one being Danger Close, the second one being Kiloton Threat, they're situations that exist in America today, and I was using the novels to highlight for people the seriousness of some of the issues that people may not be aware of.
Now, we hear about the Muslim Brotherhood. We hear about, some said, that they are, here in the United States of America. And what is the Muslim Brotherhood? Can you tell us about them a little bit?
The Muslim Brotherhood was created in 1928 by a man named Hassan al-Banna. Now, what's critical is for people to understand the theology of Islam and understand that ultimately the goal of Islam is to establish a global superstate called the Caliphate. And ultimately that superstate will bring about the reign of the Messiah or the Mahdi, who will then implement Sharia globally. So every Muslim that is a faithful Muslim, their objective is to bring about this global superstate that is dominated by Islamic law. Now, the great hope of Islam died in 1924 when the Ottoman Empire was destroyed by Kemal Ataturk in Turkey, when he took over and turned it into a secular nation, even though it was an Islamic population. He ended the Ottoman Empire, and that was the end of the hope for the Islamic world, that they would see the caliphate materialize. In 1928, 4 years after Kemal Ataturk destroyed the Ottoman Empire, Hassan al-Banna, eventually supported by a man named Said Qutb, created the Muslim Brotherhood, and the objective of the Muslim Brotherhood was to recreate the Ottoman Empire or to recreate the global caliphate. And so it became the hope of Islam that the Ottoman Empire would be recreated and they would ultimately dominate. And so they're very real. And now that we've seen events unfold in Egypt and we realize that they are a very powerful force. And Kamal, it is important for people to understand that, yes, they are in America and they have been in America.
Since when?
Well, they probably came over to America in a big way in maybe the early 60s. There is some evidence that there were elements of the Muslim Brotherhood here earlier than that. But in the early 60s is when they came over. And of course, the first organization that they created here as a front for the Muslim Brotherhood was actually the Muslim Student Association. And it is still a front for the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, what's important to understand is that the administration has denied, two previous administrations have denied that the Muslim Brotherhood was in America until Mohammed Morsi took over as the president of Egypt, and Mohammed Morsi stood up and very boldly proclaimed to the whole world that he joined the Muslim Brotherhood, as did his wife when he was a student at a university in the United States.
That's
in
right.
California.
That's correct.
So you can't deny anymore that the Muslim Brotherhood is operating in the United States. Now, it's important also to understand that in 2008, there was a trial in Dallas, Texas called the Holy Land Foundation Trial, in which 5 defendants were convicted on 108 counts of raising funds in America to support terrorism. But the most significant thing that came out of the trial was the unindicted co-conspirator list, which essentially listed most major Islamic organizations in America.
Can you name some of those?
As
The front
Islamic Society of North America, Council of American Islamic Relations, Muslim Student Association, Islamic Trust of North America. There's a whole list of them. It listed them as front groups for the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is here, it's operating in America, and it's very powerful, and it is doing exactly what it says it's going to do.
Now, you know, we hear that there are, you know, the invasions upon America. If there's in any way or form or shape that there's evidence that the way of life is under attack, the American way of life is under attack by the Muslim Brotherhood. If there's any
that's
evidence.
Right. No, there's plenty of evidence. There's plenty of evidence that the Muslim Brotherhood has infiltrated America. And you can look at, for example, look at some of the people that have been brought into the government now, brought into to be part of the administration. And if you do your research, you can find that they've been tied to some of these groups that are known to be fronts for the Muslim Brotherhood. Abdurrahman al-Moody, who was, you can find all kinds of photographs of him with the Clinton administration and even the Bush administration, was hailed as a great Muslim leader in America and was used actually as an ambassador of goodwill for the United States to Muslim countries, primarily in the Middle East. Today, that man is in prison serving a 23-year prison term for supporting terrorism. He was caught in the London Heathrow Airport with almost $350,000 that was provided to him to support terrorism. And he's serving a 23-year sentence today. So they are here, they're operating here, they're infiltrating our government, they're infiltrating our school systems, they're infiltrating our communities. And what is sad is that most Americans just don't believe that they could ever have any impact. Our way of life is under a severe and serious threat.
We hear that Abdurrahman al-Moody was one of the infiltrator that was able to establish the chaplains, the Muslim chaplain in every rank of the military, including the state capital. Is that a fact?
Yeah, al-Moody actually convinced the Clinton administration to allow him to establish a Muslim chaplaincy in all of the military services. And then, interestingly enough, he was the one that was allowed to choose who would be the chaplains inside the military. So if he's a terrorist, then it really calls into question what kind of people did he help support bringing in as military chaplains? Now, I don't know those chaplains, but you have to ask that question.
If America to lose this battle against Islamic extremism, if there's a plan B in place, and if there's such a thing, what would that be? If you have any insight on something like this.
Well, let's talk about Plan B. You know, Plan B for America is different than Plan B for the Muslims. If they don't succeed, what's their Plan B? Well, they don't have one. For 1,400 years, they've been doing exactly the same thing, which is trying to establish a global caliphate. There is no Plan B. Now, for America, the reality is if we continue to not only deny that there is a takeover in process in America, but if we don't stand up to it and we don't start turning this tide, Plan B is that we're all going to live under the tenets of Sharia. And people will listen to that and say that can never happen. But I would say this to you. In 2 years ago, the Center for Security Studies did a very detailed research on Sharia in our court systems. And determined that, and this is 2 years old, and determined that in 50 court cases, judges admitted that they used Sharia, Islamic law, to adjudicate those cases.
Correct.
So it's in our legal system now. That's why states are passing laws they called American laws for American courts. The first one to pass it was Oklahoma, and they were immediately sued, obviously by the ACLU, but the Justice Department under Eric Holder declared it to be unconstitutional. And the idea behind it was not to allow judges in those states to use Sharia to adjudicate those cases. And judges are admitting that they've been doing that. So it's an incremental encroachment on our liberties, on our Constitution in America. And today, as you look at how successful they've been in accomplishing what they've said, you have to say, this is a serious problem here in America. And there's only one protected religion today in America, only one, and that's Islam. And Nadal Hassan, for example, the shooter at Fort Hood, he gave a 50-slide brief in which he said, essentially, and I've got the briefing, his allegiance was not to the Constitution, his allegiance was to Islam. And he essentially told senior leaders in the American Army Military Command that Muslims were compelled to kill infidels. And then he was made an acting chaplain, Muslim chaplain at Fort Hood. So he was a doctor, but he was the acting Muslim chaplain at Fort Hood at the time of the shooting there, and he went out and lived out what he told these people that he was going to do. If he had been a Christian or a Jew, I can assure you his career would have been terminated right then. But the fact that he was a Muslim put him in a protected category, and that's one of the reasons that we are seeing so much success by the Muslim Brotherhood in America is because we're ignoring the threat and, in fact, we're protecting it.
One of his statements, he said he denounced the American Constitution and his allegiance to the military, and he denounced the American way of life, period, and he declared that Sharia law is his way. And he said he would not follow the American Constitution that is man-made. What is that all about?
Well, as you know, Kamal, first of all, freedom to a true Muslim is a different concept. It's freedom from man-made laws, because one of the first tenets of Sharia and of Islam is that there can be no man-made laws, only God-given or Quranic laws. That's why it's called Sharia. There can be no man-made laws. So it's freedom from the burden of man-made laws. And that's what when they talk about justice, and remember in Egypt they had the Freedom and Justice Party?
Correct. And
we Americans just said, oh, that's so wonderful, freedom and justice. It's justice under Sharia.
Right.
Remember that Sharia is the law that cuts off the hand of the thief, that makes the woman half of a man. In a property settlement, the woman only gets half of what the man does. And women have to have 2 witnesses for every man. and it is the law that literally kills a person who leaves the faith, which is why you have survived this after leaving the faith. And by Sharia, you should be dead. That's why you have people pursuing you still today.
That's right.
Because you are what they consider an apostate.
That's
you left
correct.
the faith. So Sharia is incompatible with our Constitution, first of all, because it provides no freedom of anything that we hold dear: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the right to vote, the right of equality for women, for people of different races or sexual orientation.
A government by the people, of the people, for the people, this is totally against Sharia law. And Sharia law could not be equal to such a constitution.
An Islamic republic is not run by any elected official. That's why when you look at Iran and you talk about the election of the president, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad or whoever, those elections are shams, because the government, the country, is run by the mullahs, the spiritual leaders, the ayatollahs. It's run by the spiritual leaders because it's an Islamic republic.
That's right.
In an Islamic republic, you cannot have democracy. That is one of the reasons that when we helped write a constitution for Iraq, and we started it out as the Islamic Republic of Iraq, it was kind of a no-win situation because you can't have democracy and Islam coexisting.
Can the American people be protective, and can they be involved in this fight? And if there's such a thing, what should the American people, I mean, there's a lot of people out there, housemakers, they go to work, a lot of them, some blue collar, some executive. What can they do as an American citizen to be involved in such time as this, to fight that invasion?
First thing that I would say is they need to understand first. They need to do some independent study and research to really understand this. There are a number of books, and I think that your book is certainly a good one, and some of the videos you've put out and some of the other things. They need to understand what they're dealing with, because they think of Islam as a religion, and in reality, Islam is not like Christianity or Judaism or even Hinduism. It's not just a religion. There's a portion of it that is, but it's less than 25% of Islam that is actually about religion. The rest of it is about a legal system called Sharia. It's about a financial system called Sharia-compliant finance. It's about a geopolitical system called a caliphate. It's about a military system, the Islamic concept of jihad, which is holy war. It does not deserve the same protection as Judaism, Christianity, even Buddhism in America, because it threatens our Constitution, because it's not just a religion. So Americans need to get better informed on what it is that we're up against. The second thing is they need to let their members of Congress know that they want something done about the threat of a takeover by these Islamic obstructionists, these Islamic jihadists, these Islamic extremists. They've got to let their members of Congress know. They need to also let their members of the state legislature and the city council know that they will no longer kowtow to these people. When they come in and want to build a mosque at ground zero, there has to be a groundswell of people that are well informed and understand that that's a symbol of conquest.
Correct.
When they build a mosque at a place as significant and sacred as ground zero, it's a symbol of conquest. And Americans need to get involved, and they need to get involved with organizations like yours, like Act for America. And they will give them very good ideas of how they can get involved in their local community to stop this continual encroachment of Islam into our society.
We hear that, there's socialism, Marxism, Islamism, and we hear, that they are literally, they don't agree with each other, but yet we're seeing something happening in the United States of America, that these three elements are creating almost a trilogy. Can you speak on this, General Jerry?
Yeah, I can. There's an organization in America called the Nation of Islam. Now, it's funny because they consider themselves Muslims, and I would say that the Muslim Brotherhood probably considers them to be a subcategory of Islam, but it doesn't matter. They still align themselves with Islam, the Nation of Islam, run by Louis Farrakhan.
Mm-hmm.
They teach a theology that comes from a guy named James Cone. James Cone was a hardcore Marxist.
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote extensively about his views of how to transform society to ensure that you achieve social justice.
Mm-hmm.
Well, social justice, as it is discussed and applied by James Cone in his theology, social justice is very much a Marxist concept. But it's the theology that is taught in the Nation of Islam.
That's true.
So it's the same thing as Marxism. It's the same thing that you see taught in organizations that really focus on Marxism. They teach James Cone's theology, and the Nation of Islam teaches James Cone's theology. So you have the same theology right now being taught in America, whether you're in a Muslim organization, read that as Nation of Islam, or whether you're in a Marxist organization, read that as the Southern Poverty Law Center or the American Civil Liberties Union or Code Pink or the ACLU. All of these organizations are Marxist.
We see it even manifesting in some branches in our government.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we're very rapidly becoming a Marxist nation, right? As you look at the redistribution of wealth and you look at the isolating, groups that don't agree with the direction of the country and all that. So what you have is a marriage of convenience between these organizations because they are both using the same methodology. They're both in this to achieve the same objective, which is the destruction of our society so that it can be rebuilt under their concept of what's good for America. And I would say this, each of them sees the other as useful idiots.
That's right. That's right. Can you tell us about this useful idiot?
Well, during the communist era, there was when the Soviet Union was strong and powerful, there was a concept that I think was espoused maybe by Lenin and Stalin and even Karl Marx about useful idiots, and that means that they will use anyone that's can help them to achieve their goals, and then ultimately they will discard them and they will no longer have influence. And so that's what they look at each other now, and they say the Islamists look at the Marxists and they say, you're a useful idiot, and vice versa. But when we dominate, when we finally take over, when we destroy America so that we can then take over and reshape it, we'll get rid of you and you'll be one of the casualties of that too.
In Islam, when I was practicing Islam, we refer to this as unholy alliances. And the unholy alliances, it's permitted in Islam, the use of your enemy. The greatest power of Islam, from the perspective that I came from, is as long as people don't have knowledge of Islam or the power of Islam or the spirit of Islam, then they are succeeding. The Islamic doctrine or Islamist doctrine is moving and infiltrating and even putting the moderate Muslim to fear and shame and dishonor. And so therefore, we allied with our enemy purposely to use them until they destroyed our common enemy, and then we turn against our enemy. We tear them apart in the battlefield, right there, before it's finished and done. And that was a practice that we've done.
Well, that goes back to the time of Muhammad, the prophet himself, when he came from Medina back to Mecca, and he ultimately made a treaty with the Jews.
That's true.
But he never had any intention of seeing
that.
That's right. But he never had any intention of seeing it through. It was a tactic. It was a deception. And then when he was ready and he had the strength within his army, he destroyed them.
You refer to it as hudna.
Hudna.
Hudna in Arabic, or in Islamic term, it's a term to the Muslim. It is a Muslim treaty. It's equal to truce, but it is not. It's equal to peace, just like what happened with the Antichrist and Israel, the 7-year peace treaty. And it has to be broken in 3.5 years. It must be broken according to Islamic laws. And when it's broken, you can turn on the people that you made peace with and surprise them with deadly attack, taking them out of perspective. So that's a good analogy.
And combine that with the concept of taqiyya,
Oh, yes.
which in Islam not only allows but encourages that you lie to protect the faith or to further the faith. So, in Christianity, we don't have such a concept, but Muslims believe, if they believe in the Quran, that taqiyya is an essential part of how they not only survive, but how they move their religion forward, lying to you.
Yes.
Lying to you about their intentions, lying to you about the true nature of Islam. The reason this is important is because the average American will listen to a passage being read from the Quran which says there's no compunction in religion.
That's right.
In other words, you can't force a person to convert to Islam. What they don't realize is there's a concept called progressive revelation and abrogation, which means that the things that were revealed to Muhammad the prophet or allegedly revealed to him by the archangel Gabriel in the latter part of his life when he was forming his army in Medina were all about jihad, so they superseded or they abrogated everything that was written when he was forming the religion in Mecca. And now they will lie to you and say, well, look, here's a passage that says you can't force a person. Yeah, but sometime later, he got another passage that said, lay an ambush and slay them wherever you find them. It's all about jihad, but people don't understand abrogation and progressive revelation and taqiyya.
And the abrogation you're talking about in Arabic, in Islamic Sharia, it's called al-nasikh wal-mansukh. And that meaning...
That's a hard word for me to say. But.
It meant is whatever was spoken before, it's overridden by something better and greater. Right. So Allah, the God of Islam, changed his mind. Right. And he said, what I've done before, now it doesn't apply, so I'm giving you something that is better that you would follow it. And it was as for warning for the Muslim to follow that change. And if you don't, then Jahannam, hell, is your portion. Speaking of what you spoke on al-taqiyya, al-taqiyya is a word from the Quran. It's called al-taqwa. And the al-taqiyya, it has a holiness in it, but that holiness, what make it holy is when you lie to your enemy to deceive them. Mm-hmm. So therefore my mother used to tell me when I was a little boy, General Jerry, there's al-hasanat was-sayyi'at, doing the good work and they're doing the bad work, the dark and the things that you do in your life. And Allah will weigh them against one another. But nevertheless, there are two kinds of sayyi'at, which is the bad thing. One of them is speaking on, lying about yourself, and that's considered dark and it counts against you. The second one is to lie for the sake of Islam, and that is considered righteousness, to deceive your enemy, and that to fulfill the hadith by Bukhari in the tradition of Islam by Muhammad. He said, befriend your enemy until you enslave them. So therefore, that to fulfill this, and further, there is another doctrine, which is, the Americans do not see that doctrine, that we see it now prominent in deceiving the church. And that doctrine is called al-kitman. And it's also from the Quran meaning the Islamic holy book, that is. And al-kitman is when you say, there's no compulsion in a religion, and you stop there. But you don't read what's below it, except to the Jews and the Christians, and the Yahud wa Nasara. So therefore what happened is, but for your Muslim brothers, there's no compulsion. But when it comes against your enemy, there is. Because these are the doctrine that we studied from our childhood. This is amazing what we just talked about. Now, there is something very near and dear to me. What is the role of the church, in this significant battle? Can the church do anything? A lot of the church people, as I travel and speak at churches, as you do, you are a speaker, and one of the questions is, what can we do? We have no idea what to do. How can we be involved as Christians?
Well, first of all, I'll go back and say the first thing you can do as a Christian is get informed and understand what Islam really is. and understand that that component that is a religion is only a very small part of Islam. So understand what it is. Spend some time. Read things like Jim Merck's book called Islam Rising. He's got a series of 3 of them, and they're very easy to read and understand what Islam is and the history of it. So you have to understand that first. Second thing is, whenever you see a church or a pastor or anyone who is clearly ignoring the realities of the danger of Islam, take them to task. If it's your pastor, take them to task and tell them when they start talking about things that I think are very troubling, like Chrislam, where we have pastors all over America that are now saying we all worship the same God. Well, one of 2 things, and I'll say this very directly. When your pastor or any pastor that you see says we all worship the same God, there's one of 2 things happening. Either that pastor doesn't know the first thing about Islam or he's lying. And that's the only 2 possibilities. Because we don't worship the same God, and when we pretend that we do, all we're doing is encouraging the Muslim Brotherhood and discouraging the mainstream Muslim. And I don't know exactly any other way to define it. There are so many Muslims in America that reject Sharia. They don't want to live under Sharia. They've been there in many cases. They've done it before. But they don't have a voice. But when they see the United States government, the United States leadership, and especially when they see the church standing up saying we all worship the same God, they're just so discouraged because they're saying either you don't get it or you're too scared to stand up to it. So when you see things in the church like Chrislam, reject it and hold the pastors and the leaders accountable for it. The third thing you can do is take the gospel of Jesus Christ into the Islamic communities. You know, Kamal, Muslims are spiritual people.
That's right.
They are searching for God. They're precious people. The reality is. And the average Muslim in America is not a threat. The problem is they don't have a voice. The problem is that they are scared to death because when they do speak out, they're threatened by the Muslim Brotherhood. The only voice for Islam in America is the Muslim Brotherhood, and you see a few very brave Muslims that try to speak out, like Zuhdi Jasser down in Phoenix, who has tried to be a bold advocate for the majority of the Americans, and he's threatened. He's thrown out of his mosque. He's always on the hit list of somebody, and he's ridiculed and discredited. And so we need to take the gospel as the church, find the community in your local city or county and take the gospel. Do it the right way. Don't do the wrong things, but take the gospel and begin to bring light.
That's great. These are great. You know, how about the intercession or the prayers? How is that effectual?
I think that the most important thing is intercessory prayer. Now, I don't want to get into theology here, but I believe that intercessory prayer is a very special thing, and I think it's different than just praying. I think when you say I will intercede, I mean that's a full-time commitment. That's the suicide bomber of the Christian world, because that intercessor is saying I'm going to get between you and the enemy.
That's right. That's right.
So intercessory prayer, I think, is very, very critical. And Americans should be praying for about 3 things. One, that the eyes of the leadership in America will be open to the seriousness of the threat from the Muslim Brotherhood. 2, that the church will wake up and realize it. And then 3, that we'll be given the wisdom and discernment to know how to react.
Correct.
You see, when in your community, when you see something that is not right, and Dearborn, Michigan is one of the worst places, where as a Christian, you go out on the street at the Arab festival and hand out Bible tracts 2 blocks away from the festival, and you get arrested and you get put in jail.
Correct.
The question is, where are the churches in Dearborn, Michigan? Where are the churches in Detroit right across the street that are not down there on the mayor's, in the mayor's office raising Cain about it, telling him, we demand that you obey the law yourself and let these people go and preserve our First Amendment rights to do what we're doing. But the church is silent. The church doesn't want to get out and offend anybody. Well, you're going to have to start doing that.
Well, I'm getting excited just listening to you. I'm going like, if this word does not change the heart of people I mean, that's amazing. I remember in one instance to confirm what you just said, the mayor of Kansas invited me to prayer breakfast. So the Muslim Brotherhood withstood me, and CARE, ISNA, all the above. And they used different Muslim front as well. Even to the point they used different priests or different Jewish leaders, rabbis. And so therefore what happened is they want to take me out from speaking. And that mayor is a praying man. And he started investigating. And when he investigated, the God people start calling from all over because it started making news. And they start saying, we know Kamal Salim. He's a good man and he preached the gospel and he has a good testimony. And we know who the Muslim Brotherhood are. Who do you listen to? So the mayor allowed me despite, and it was very successful. It was one of the best prayer breakfasts ever in Kansas. But the mayor belonged to a big church. So the Muslim Brotherhood launched an attack against the mayor church. Little by little, they start, engaging the church to bring about to pray inside the church, that they're looking for a place to pray. They're looking, we are people of peace, we worship the same God. And the Word of God says, my people perish for the lack of knowledge. And the pastor didn't know their strategy, and he allowed them to come to the church. But the truth is to come and sway the church and put pressure that the mayor would never do something like this. And this is a tactic in Islam, is instead of attacking that person, start shifting the tectonic plate from under and change the situation for your benefits. It's called political Islam. And is that a part of jihad?
Well, sure it is. When you came into a place to pray, when you were still practicing Islam, was it routine that you immediately consecrated that place where you were praying? You dedicated that to Allah?
Absolutely.
So if they walk in your church, as you described now, if they walk in your church and use your church to pray, they consecrate your church. They commit your church to Allah. Now, in your prayers as a Muslim, did you curse Christianity?
Absolutely. It's a mandatory. Islam came specifically to destroy the Jews first and the Christians second. When I was a little boy, we used to write on the street of Beirut, the people of Saturday first and the people of Sunday next. After we destroy the Jews, we'll come for the Christians. And we were able to, kick the Jew out of Lebanon, and then we launched the civil war against the Christians.
But we have churches in America. We're going back to the question of what can the churches do. Get smart on what's going on here. You allow an Islamic group, a Muslim group, to come into your church to use it for worship. They consecrate it, they dedicate it to Allah, and then they curse your faith. More importantly, they curse your Savior as a Christian when they do so. But pastors very boldly proclaim, we've allowed them to do this in the interest of love.
That's right.
Well, wait a minute.
Reaching out.
I think you need to go back and read God's Word, because there is something in Isaiah 5 about calling good evil and evil good.
That's correct.
So you're allowing people to come into your church that will call good evil and evil good, and commit your church to Allah.
And calling dark light and light dark. That's what it says exactly. In General Jerry, the first surah in the Quran is called Al-Fatiha, which is the opening. And the declaration of Fatiha, it declares that Islam, that the blessed one, the called one. Right. And it says, it negates two people out of the blessings, the same people that Islam says we are people of the book, meaning they are part of the Jews and the Christian book, that they are the third testament. That's what they call themselves, the final testament, that they came to replace the first and the second. So therefore, at Al-Fatiha, it says, غَيْرِ الْمَغْضُوبِ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا الضَّالِّينَ. الْمَغْضُوبِ عَلَيْهِمْ, which is the accursed one. The Jews are the cursed one. And الضَّالِّينَ, the one they perverted the way, which is the Christians, that they believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. In Islam, Jesus Christ is only a prophet, and he was never crucified. Now, General Jerry, do you think this is a spiritual battle, or is that physical battle for the church?
Well, it's clearly a spiritual battle. This whole thing is a spiritual battle. I mean, it really is a battle between good and evil. And again, I'm going to say, and I want to be clear on this, there are many Muslims that reject Sharia. They reject jihad. Even though it's part of the Quran, it's part of the teachings, they reject it. So this is about the evil that is being brought into America by the Muslim Brotherhood and those who want to see Sharia. It is a spiritual battle. And look at what's happening in America today, where Christians are being persecuted just like they are in Egypt and Pakistan and Libya and other places. They're being persecuted in America today, and at the same time, we're protecting Islam as a protected religion. Is that not a spiritual battle?
Correct.
Are we not upside down? What was America founded on? It was founded on a Judeo-Christian base, but with a constitution that provided freedom of religion for all religions. But today, the very foundations of this nation are under attack, and that can be called nothing but a spiritual battle. And the church should be part of the solution. Pastors should be up exposing what we're up against. Pastors should be out encouraging their congregations to get smarter on this and to do something, and get involved and get active. But they're not, and that means we're losing this spiritual battle because the church is not energized. There are very few churches that have that really have the courage to bring you into them.
That's true.
Where they ought to be hearing what you've got to say because you lived it. You were one of them.
That's right.
Now you're one of us. We're united under the banner of the blood of Jesus Christ. You and I were enemies. We're now united because we're both have committed our lives to Jesus Christ. We're the sons of the same Father.
Amen.
But in most churches, they don't have a clue, and the leadership in America is afraid of these people because they've used terrorism to intimidate, and so much of the leadership in America today is just totally living in fear of a terrorist event if they don't kowtow and do all they can to try and appease the very people that want to destroy us.
General Jerry, you said something, it's at most important. A lot of American pastors, American leaders, politicians, are very confused about this. You hear the Muslims saying, jihad is not a holy war. Jihad is to be a better person. But then you just said that many leaders are intimidated, by something. How many faces jihad has, because if it is, I know in the Quran it says al-jihad fi sabilillah, meaning is to war, a holy war for the sake of Allah, and if you can deny this, it is, but there are a multitude of faces of jihad. Can you express some of those, like these people are intimidated. 9/11 did not, it's one form of jihad, but what is intimidating these people? What kind of jihad?
Yeah. See, there's a cultural jihad.
Correct.
And that is the greater danger. Terrorism helps to facilitate cultural jihad because you perpetrate these atrocious terrorist acts, you kill a lot of people, you maim a lot of people, and people begin to live in fear, which makes it much easier for the cultural jihad as I begin to infiltrate your society, as I begin to demand certain things by your city council or your state legislature or your federal government. You're more inclined to give me what I want because you know that I'm tied to those same people that just killed 3,000 people in the Twin Towers in New York, and I could call that down. Remember when the imam at the mosque at Ground Zero, remember when
Imam
he was—
Faisal.
When Imam Faisal said, well, if you don't do this, there's going to be a price to be paid. That was a threat.
That's what he
It
wants
was
about the abrogation you talk about,
Yeah.
From peaceful
Right.
to radical.
It was a very direct threat. Oh, listen, we just want to bring this cultural center here, and we want to show that we were a peaceful religion. And then when it looked like over 70% of Americans were not going to accept it and that it wasn't going to be approved, he then switched over to the other face, which was, if you don't approve this, there's going to be a price to be paid. You're going to have to deal with the consequences. That was a threat of terrorism.
That's right, that was.
So this cultural jihad is far more devastating in the long term than just the terrorism, but the terrorism supports their ability to be able to infiltrate our schools, our government, our churches, our cities, and influence the change of direction and the destruction in our legal system of that legal system to be replaced by Sharia.
You know, there was two memorandum. One was declared by the Al-Qaeda, which is 7-step strategy. And then there's the other memorandum that was discovered by the Holy Land Foundation trial, which is anyone can view on the internet nowadays, because it happened in the United States of America.
Right.
Now, in the Muslim Brotherhood invasion to American culture and Western civilization, what are the 5-step strategy that they have to bring the American culture, if you can recall them?
Well, I can't recite it exactly, but I'm glad you brought that up. And I look at it all the time, but I don't want to, if I recite something and somebody goes back and says, well, you didn't say that exactly right, then
That's
it'll
right.
just be criticism. But it starts out with a very low-level infiltration into the society.
Correct.
And it builds progressively to finally a takeover in step 5. And I would tell you that as part of the strategy is that they come in very quietly. They have what they call a jihad of the womb, which is that they populate at a very rapid rate, and then they get more bold. And as they become bolder, they begin to infiltrate the institutions in America, and then they begin to demand through the political system certain rights and certain privileges that maybe even others are not entitled to, until ultimately they go into a training phase where they train for war and finally they take over. But what you said is something that people need to understand. In 2004, in Annandale, Virginia, this is in the shadow of the Capitol, the archives for the Muslim Brotherhood in America were found in a false basement by the guy that was really the operations officer for the Muslim Brotherhood. And as they went through this, and the FBI's had this since 2004, and it's incredible that it hasn't had more impact on the way the FBI operates. But as they went through these archives there, they found this thing called an explanatory memorandum that laid out this 5-phase plan. But one of the things that they said in that memorandum was that the Ikhwan, or the Brotherhood in America, must need to understand that their activities is a type of grand jihad.
That's right.
A grand holy war against America. And that its ultimate objective is to destroy America from within. Now, this is free online. If they go to the Center for Security Policy and go to their website and find this, it's called the Team B2 report.
Now, you were an author, one of the authors of the Team B2 report.
Right.
Now, I'd like you to explain, number one, why it's B2. And number two is, who are these people who wrote this book? Are these people are just, a bunch of authors, or a bunch of people that they came together and said, let's put a book and fight, something here? Or who are these people? What is the purpose of this book?
Team B2 is a reference to a situation that occurred when Ronald Reagan came in as the president, where he had been told by many of his staff that détente was working, the détente that Jimmy Carter started. Détente's working, the Russians are becoming our friends, and he didn't believe it, so he said, that's the official government assessment. I want a Team B. In other words, Team A is the government. Team B, I want to bring in some independent people, and I want them to do an assessment, tell me what they think. And they came in, they were called Team B. And they wrote a report that said, no, détente's not working. Russia's taking advantage of this, and they're growing in strength. So we called this the Team B2. They were Team B1, we were Team B2, as we wrote about the increasing encroachment of Sharia into our society. Now, I think that this was written by a group of people. I can assure you, I'm the least credible of this bunch of 19. We have a former CIA director, James Woolsey. We have a former DIA director. We have people that have served in the CIA, DIA, that have served in the government.
Director of Navy.
Yeah, absolutely. Admiral Ace Lyons, that have lived in the Middle East, that have been case officers. These are people that have lived it, have been associated with the realities of the Muslim Brotherhood for a long time, and they understand it.
These people were on a case before all this became elaborate, before it came out in the open. So they were working on it, they were part of it, and they were commissioned by the USA government, the American government. You know, the purpose of the B2 report, should the American people obtain a copy of this? Should they learn about it? What is the purpose of this book?
The purpose was to inform people, and it is very detailed and it gives a lot of information. It'll give you the whole copy of that explanatory memorandum. It is called, for those who want to get it, it is called Sharia, the Threat to America, with the subtitle, The Team B2 Report. You can get it for nothing if you desire to do so and download it by going to the Center for Security Policy website and look for Sharia, the Threat to America. But it's very enlightening.
Who should read this book?
Every American.
Like teachers?
Absolutely.
Politicians?
Yes.
How about pastors?
Yes, pastors must read it.
How about intercessors?
Yes, yes.
How about just normal American person that, you know, that lives his life, go work from 8 to 5 every day, you know, he has, 2, 3 children, you know, he's paying his bills to live, you know, I mean, would this book help him understand?
I can assure you it will. This book will tell you what all the front groups are for the Muslim Brotherhood, as identified in the 2008 Holy Land Foundation trial. It'll tell you the 5 phases. It'll show you who some of the people in America are that we know are associated with the Muslim Brotherhood, and by the way, that are still operating openly in America and have never been taken to task over.
A question that really a lot of people talking about, you know, we hear about the 300. These are pastors today that they are saying, you know, for me and my house, we will worship the Lord. These are pastors that they want to make the difference. These are pastors that are not afraid to talk about, you know, political America, you know, talk about the issues. And many pastors out there are really, they are fearing, General Jerry, that they have the 501c3, the separation of government and state. Is that a fact, or can any pastor start speaking about the issues? And can you enlighten us on this, please?
Kamal, I'm glad you raised this issue. First of all, there's never been a church in America that has lost its 501c3 status, never. One church lost it for a few hours and it was restored. And by the way, it's unconstitutional to start with. But the other big secret is churches don't need a 501c3. Thomas Rose Baptist Church, for example, Jerry Falwell's church that he founded has never had a 501c3, and they've raised $1.5 billion. So you don't need a 501c3. So we have this thing every year called Pulpit Freedom Sunday, where we get pastors all over the country to preach hard sermons that would absolutely violate a legitimate prohibition through the 501c3. They send it to the IRS, and they never even hear from the IRS, and the idea is to get the Supreme Court to take it because we know we'll win.
I will finish with this, General Jerry, for this session. What really burdens my heart is we have priests, preachers, clergy, pastors out there in this nation, and these are men of God, that they know the Word of God. They studied the Word of God. They took an oath to protect the people, the nation, the church. We are not seeing the pastor taking stands, and we are seeing the church. The other day I had a vision as I was praying for the church. I was in my prayer closet and I was praying for the pastors, for the leaders, you know, Christian leaders in the United States of America. And in the vision that I had, General, it broke my heart even now as I'm thinking about it. There were thousands of eagles. And those eagles, each one dug a hole in the ground and stuck his head in the hole. And as they stuck their head in the hole, their feathers start changing from an eagle feather to an ostrich feather. And I heard the Lord said, behold, these are my pastors.
Yeah.
And it just grieved me, because God put this on my heart to pray for the pastors. And it grieved me to see that they are changing their identity. Why we are not seeing pastor fighting? Are they afraid?
Yes.
What is going on? And are they not understanding? And or I'm having a problem with this. There's a solution for this.
Pastors are intimidated. They're intimidated by some specious notions like the restrictions that are in place by 501c3. But the sad thing is that a lot of pastors across America have compromised. They've compromised on the issues. They've compromised and focused more on the church than the kingdom. They've focused more on being popular than protecting their flock. You see, when the shepherd that sees that wolf coming, that sees that bear coming, as David did, and he doesn't warn his people, he's going to be held accountable according to the book of Ezekiel. He's going to be held accountable.
Watchman on the wall.
That's right. And many pastors today are not shepherds. They don't see, they're just not looking at this through a biblical lens, and they've been intimidated by a variety of things. Now, there are some that are very courageous. There are some that they don't care how much they get beat up. They don't care what the secular world does to them. They say, my ultimate accountability is to God.
Amen.
And they are out there doing exactly what they need to be doing. But the majority of the pastors in America are more concerned about offending someone, more concerned about their 501c3, more concerned about somebody getting up and walking out because they've offended them. So we've got to start encouraging pastors to be bold and do what is necessary to protect their flocks.
General Jerry, thank you, and may
thank
God
you.
bless you, and may God
bless
bless our America.
God bless America.
Thank you for watching this session of Unveiling, the Threat of Islamic Extremism. Unveiling was produced by Coom Ministries. The mission of Coom Ministries is to educate the Christian and Jewish communities about the impending dangers of radical Islam and to reach Muslims with the redemptive message of Christ. To learn more about Kamal Salim and the work of Coom Ministries, or to access additional resources concerning Islamic extremism, go to coomministries.com.